Today, our guest speaker is Al Holliday. Al's presentation is all about Pennsylvania. Al and his family have been in Pennsylvania since 1968, when he came here to be the director of the Bureau of the Office of Information and Publications for the State Department of Education. That is a mouthful. After a change of governor, Al changed too and became a professional speaker and consultant for school boards and educational organizations. Al is a native of New York and has degrees from Michigan State University. He began Pennsylvania Magazine in 1961 and is the publisher of that magazine. His wife was business manager and copy editor for many years. Their youngest son, Matt, has been editor and producer of the publication for more than 15 years. Let's all give Al a nice warm welcome.
Thank you. Linda, when I tell you, can you pass these out, please, on both sides?
Yes.
And I'll put them here. Oh, yeah, you can
I'll just take
them
them down and you can let me know.
So just after a few minutes.
Okay.
Thank you. She said 1961, it was 1981 when we started Pennsylvania Magazine. So I appreciate you being here. I'm honored to be a speaker, invited to be a speaker at the association that we've lived here since 1969, so we're a long-term resident of Cumberland. And I went upstairs to see the special great map at the top of the elevator done by Barbara McGarry. And if you haven't seen it, you should. She did a beautiful job showing major places in Cumberland County, and I'll refer to one or two of those as we go along this morning. I want to say that it's a wonderful day in Pennsylvania. Somebody I knew pretty well used to have that as his keynote. And it's a lovely day because we have so many things happening across the nation which we aren't going to talk about today. We're not going to have a debate. And of course, we didn't see a debate anyway. And some strange things happening in Harrisburg. The governor has managed to irritate a bunch of people in the other party to the extent that we may have, according to best estimates, we're going to have a budget in about 4 years from now. We're going to have a new budget in Pennsylvania. And of course, the Attorney General is being shown the way to the back door as well. But thank goodness we don't have to talk about those things today. Would you pass out those sheets, please? Because our curriculum is in printed form. I always appreciated a presenter when I was an attendee, because that meant I didn't have to take so many notes. The stuff was right there for me. And I've done the same thing for you here today. All of the 25 and a half questions we're going to be dealing with are in printed form, front and back, and we can have fun with those in just a minute. The first one is about Ben Franklin, and I can say unequivocally, I have two things in common with Ben Franklin. Number one, I'm also from out of state. He was from Boston, of course. And the second, he gravitated to the printed word because he had a wonderful press. He did so well, he was able to retire young, and then he ended up serving the 13 colonies and Pennsylvania. So I've asked the question here, which of the following were not started by Ben Franklin? He has had a wonderful background. If anybody owned the 1700s, it was Ben Franklin, because he lived here almost 100 years. And he published Poor Richard's Almanac for 25 years. He was governor of our own colony, and then of course he was the postmaster as well. And so some of the things that he did here, some of these weren't invented by Ben Franklin. The lightning rod, bifocals, escalators, circulating library, radio, the internet. Well, he did the lightning rod and the bifocals. He didn't do the escalator. I think you knew that one. Circulating library, yes. The radio, no. And the internet, he didn't invent that. If he had been here, he would have. Who do you think invented the internet? Now, everybody says that name, Al Gore, and of course, he didn't. It was a conglomeration of a whole bunch of people, Somebody stuck that label on them. So you got to be very, very careful of labels people stick on you, because if you're in the wrong venue, you may go through the rest of your life, because a lot of people were involved in that. In our state, we have 67 counties. 2 of them were named after women. Can you believe this? Shocking. Before women's lib at all. Was it Potter Burks, Clearfield, Blair, Montour Huntington, and Green Pike? Pike would be appropriate for the address of this place. Well, it was Montour and Huntington, and it turned out that Madame Montour was maybe part Indian, and she did serve in a role as a translator and a helper during our early years. And Mrs. Huntington never came to this USA for some reason. She was nominated by a man who did. He obviously knew her pretty well and was able to convince people, for no apparent reason, to name the county after her. Number 3 is an unusual situation. There are a number of them in this presentation today. William and Hannah Penn, you know who they are, of course, received a rather significant honor in 1983. Signed into law or recognition by President Reagan. It was not a memorial. It was not Penn State Park. And it was not a ship in their name. Oddly enough, of all 50 states, they got honorary United States citizenship. And I don't think anybody in this country, apart from them, has received this same kind of honor. Number 4, if you're a Penn State fan, and of course we all are, there was a general who lost a leg in a battle during the Civil War. He later became our governor, and the state, he has a sporting legacy. Can you guess at all who that might be? Beaver. Mr. Beaver and that Beaver Stadium. And a few of you may have gone to the Beaver Stadium to see football games. And that's the man that you're honoring when you go there. What town in our state has a connection with Uncle Billy and Colonel Drake? Titusville. And the odd story about Titusville, what you didn't know until I'm telling you today, was that Colonel, of course, was not a colonel, and his helper was an Uncle Billy. They were drilling for oil. Now, why is beyond me to this day, because we didn't have automobiles then. What were they going to do if they struck oil? What were they going to do with it? Well, there would be a replacement for whale oil, for one thing, and then other things to be determined later on. So a fellow in Connecticut sent these people to Pennsylvania to drill for oil. And he was a little bit tired of their delay in getting anything done, so he sent a letter. He said, forget about it, knock down the stuff and come on home. He put that in the U.S. mail. And of course, it wasn't as efficient then as it is today, or then, and the letter wasn't delivered. That Monday, when it would have been delivered, Uncle Billy ran in to see the colonel and said, the oil's coming up. And that is something you didn't know in Titusville back in, what was the year in that? 1859. And the population there, within 2 years, 5 years, went from 250 to 10,000. And people just loved to go to that kind of, it was really sort of an oily resort after a little while.
Does that include Pit Hole?
Say again, please.
Does that include pit hole?
I believe it does. Yeah, it was a fantastic place for a number of years. And then we go to a state toy. You know, the legislators in their wisdom say certain things like this, we have a state dog and a state cat and a state cloud in the sky or whatever. But we don't have a state toy as yet. Now I'm going to nominate a few here, and hula hoop, skateboard, a kite in the shape of the state, and then there's another well-known item. Can anybody in the back suggest what that other item might be? Slinky. The strangest thing I've ever seen, and I have never been a fan of the slinky, because it couldn't do anything except go downstairs. But people loved it. Don't tell me why. See, if you're going to invent something, don't make it logical and do like these people did. The fellow who did this by accident was Richard James in 1943. And he saw this thing and he said, oh, I wonder if that has any application. So he made a whole bunch of them and took them to a department store, and they sold out in the first day. Since then, Slinky has sold 300 million Slinkies. She and Richard, his wife Betty, the two of them started not getting along. That sometimes happens in families, we hate to see it. But in this case, she divorced him. He got religion, went to Bolivia, of all places, and died there a few years later. Betty ran the company, and she moved it to Hollidaysburg. Now, with my name, you know that I've gone there to see it. Well, the answer is no. But she moved the company to Hollidaysburg in 1964, and she passed away in 1998. It's since been sold to somebody else, but as far as I can tell, it's still being made in Hollidaysburg. So put it on your Christmas list. Slinky is still around in many, many different forms. We recently celebrated the 50th anniversary of an important discovery. Number one, I know a lot of people wish it was the cure for male pattern baldness, the birth control pill, the polio vaccine, a drug to eliminate gout. And who was the celebrated gout sufferer? Mr. Ben Franklin. He spent an awful lot of time in France, and they fed him and fed him. And he didn't want it, of course, but he ate it, and a lot of things he shouldn't, and he had a bad case of gout. Anyway, the answer is, of course, the polio vaccine. The name of the person who is given credit to? Yeah, Jonas Salk. And as in many cases, and we're going to come up with a couple in a minute here, or at least one, a lot of discoveries in the latter part of the 19th century, people claim the same thing happening. And a lot of people said, well, I discovered it, I discovered it, I discovered it. Well, he's given the credit for it anyway, because at that time there was a great desire to explore new things of great problems, and he finally came through with this, and we give him the full credit for it. Now here's one, Daniel Drawbaugh. You all know about him in our own Cumberland County, and he was an inventor. He was a strange person. Most geniuses are a little bit strange. You know, Colonel, don't you agree with that? That we geniuses are sometimes a little strange, and he was too. Throughout his life, his wife and his sons kept telling him, you know, all these things you're monkeying around with, why don't you get a decent job, you know, and get out of here? Well, he was an inventor, and here are some things that he invented, or I'm suggesting, and you figure it out. The telephone, television, digital camera, pneumatic drill, radio, track phone, folding lunchbox, burglar alarm, and snowblower. Now the ones that he did invent, according to him, were the telephone, pneumatic drill, folding lunchbox, and burglar alarm. The issue of the telephone is a complicated one, and I think you know that this matter of who gets credit for the telephone went to the Supreme Court for the patent. And there was an appeal made, and it turns out that of the members of the Supreme Court who were going to hear who gets the patent for the telephone, several of them, at least one for sure, and maybe others, own stock in Alexander Graham Bell's company. And they didn't recuse themselves, and they might better have done so. Daniel did not have two nickels to rub together, almost. And he was not illiterate by any means, but he was not versed in the language of lawyers. And if you go to court and you don't have the lawyer's language, you're in trouble to begin with. And of course, Alexander Graham Bell had been around for a long time. Supposedly, he had invented the telephone 10 years before the patent issue even came up, and people in their communities, in that community, swore that they heard it. And how the Supreme Court ruled, and that's why we have Bell Telephone Company. They ruled in favor of the man with the money. The Erie Triangle, this is an interesting story as well, and I think some of you might not know what the Erie Triangle is. This is the state of Pennsylvania, right here, make a line down there, and this is the Delaware River, and then we have the parallel and the parallel here. This is the Erie Triangle, if you can vision the map. Now, why is that an important factor? First of all, it was something that 3 or 4 states wanted. Connecticut, of all places, and Massachusetts wanted it, and New York wanted it, this place here, on Lake Erie. Now, why on earth would Massachusetts and Connecticut want that? Well, it turned out when the kings and queens gave land to people to settle their particular areas, they did it with a little bit of impropriety, is that the best word for it? They said, okay, you can have this part of this new country from sea to shining sea. Now, they didn't know what the other end was going to be, but they said sea to shining sea. So Connecticut wanted the land in that small strip all the way across the northern tier, all the way to Lake Erie. And so did Massachusetts. So the 2 states wanted that. And of course, it's right next to New York. Well, somebody at the federal government level made a really intelligent decision. And I'm not saying that's unusual, but sometimes people say it is. Anyway, they said to Pennsylvania people, we realize, and this is something that most people don't know, and that is of the 13 colonies, only 1 state did not have direct access to the Atlantic Ocean. We were a landlocked state. So by selling the Erie Triangle to Pennsylvania, we had access to Lake Erie. And of course, that made us unique because we had access to the Delaware River, and we had access to the Ohio River at Pittsburgh. And so this put us and had an access to all of the Great Lakes. And we bought it for $151,000 in 1792. We got 300 square miles, and it was a fantastic purchase, and the people in the area love it because now they can make Welch grape juice and wine. It's a wonderful area for wine because they have lake effect warmth in the fall, so it was a good deal for the people in that area. By the way, there's a new biography out about the long-term mayor of Erie, and I'll tell you that in a few minutes. I got to meet him on a trip one time, sponsored by the state. And we also had reference to a book that was published about the crime in Carlisle. We reviewed that in Pennsylvania Magazine a year or so ago, so I knew about that. So anyway.
Where did they buy it from?
Pardon?
did they buy the land from?
the federal government. It was sort of like New York wanted it, but the feds for some reason had control of this. And so the wiser heads did prevail, thank goodness for that. And they finally got rid of Connecticut's ridiculous claim and Massachusetts' ridiculous claim, because you can go in the northern tier today and you'll see references to names that belong in Connecticut. All right, there's a situation why Pittsburgh is the only city in our state allowed to use the H in its name, Pittsburgh, B-U-R-G-H. And the deal is that there was a Federal Bureau of Names that operated from 1891 to 1911. In 1891, they sent out an edict. From now on, if you have a burg and you have the H, get rid of that H in your name. We have too many duplicates. Now, they didn't pick out just one. There was a lot of bills and burgs and other kinds of names that people hooked on to people. So they did make a lot of changes because they had problems with the mail. So Pittsburgh, without the H, is how it is referred to in many places from 1891 to 1911. And then somebody just said, we're going to appeal this decision. And because Forbes and other people of Scottish descent had helped settle Pittsburgh. So they appealed this decision and they were finally granted permission to reuse the H. There's one other city that does use the H, and that's Plattsburgh, and I'll let the people in New York worry about that one. But anyway, Pittsburgh got the H back. Okay, who designed and built the first Jeep? Lee Iacocca wanted to claim that the company he was with gets all the credit for the Jeep, and that's simply not true. Where'd the name Jeep come from? Well, it was supposed to be a general purpose vehicle as we were going to enter World War II. General purpose, GP, Jeep. That's what stuck, the name stuck. And the feds sent out an invitation to all the auto manufacturers in the USA. And they said, we'd like to have a general purpose vehicle. We don't have one right now. So here are general specifications, and we'd like you to come up with a vehicle and bring it down to Aberdeen, maybe, proving grounds in Maryland. And then we'll pick one to get the very, very big contract for World War II. Only one company responded, and that was the people that made something called the Bantam car in Butler, Pennsylvania. And Carl Probst was the chief engineer, and he and his staff got together, and they put together this vehicle using a lot of parts off the shelf, but he also made a design, and he and his team drove this to Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland, and it was accepted. And the problem is for Bantam, although it wasn't really a problem, they had to give over all the plans and specifications of everything they did. Then the feds took the vehicle, they accepted it, they probably paid them, a decent amount of money for it, and then they let Willys and Ford revise those initial plans based on the Bantam car that the Butler company had developed, that the Bantam car had developed. So Willys and Ford did manufacture Jeeps for World War II, and there were, had to be several million of them anyway. Can you guess what it cost in 1942 or 1941 to make a Willys Jeep? $649. I think the price went up as time went on. Anyway, that's the story about, there are several good books on this topic, because Lee Iacocca made a lot of people in that part of the state rather angry when he claimed that his people were the ones that did all this work on the Jeep, and of course they weren't. Here's a really, really important one What are the names of the railroads on the monopoly board? Okay, the Pennsylvania Railroad, we know that to be a given, no question about that. Then there was Reading Railroad, and then there's B&O, which was Baltimore and Ohio, and then Short Line. Now, of all four, that was the only one that was not a real name. They used Short Line. In fact, it was Shore Line. That was a real railroad company out of Atlantic City, and for some reason they wanted to change it. I don't know why, but anyway, when you play Monopoly again, you'll see those there. Okay, number 13, let's see what we got on that one. Who was the person who designed or created Little League baseball? Carl Stutz, S-T-O-T-Z. Now here's, I mentioned a few interesting things about these people and places. He had no children of his own, he and his wife. They had a nephew, two nephews in fact, and he was watching them play ball one time, and they were having a dickens of a time even finding a place to play because the big boys shoot them all. And he called them over and he says, wouldn't you like to play on your own ball field with base paths that meet your particular need because you're smaller? And how'd you like to have a uniform to wear? How'd you like to be part of a league? And he convinced a bunch of other people in town to become managers, and he designed the base paths and the uniforms. So they started off with 3 teams in Williamsport. 1939, I think, was the proper year. So he gets the credit for starting it, although the other 2 managers, they wanted equal credit, and of course they couldn't have gotten those. I talked with Carl not too many years ago, before he passed, obviously. He wanted us to publish his life story. And I said, Carl, are you going to put in there why you left the Little League company? Because he did in the early 1950s. It turns out that he needed supplies, so he let the people at Goodyear, I believe it was, kind of buy in. And this was a conglomerate, and they kind of took over the whole operation. And Carl had been a clerk in a company, and to operate a franchise, to operate a conglomerate with hundreds and thousands of teams across the USA by this time was really a little bit beyond him. And so they kind of bought him out. They told him, we want the names of all the people you've been working with. And he says, I can't do that, because he was afraid of retaliation. So he would never publish who his supporters were. They took over. Now, of course, the big deal is not where Carl did this in Williamsport. It's in South Williamsport. And I've never gone to a game there. I've driven by it. My son and his family have gone there a number of years, and they really get a bang out of it. All of the umpires and the people who work there do it without any recompense. They do it out of the love of the game. And Pennsylvania got lucky because of what? A few miles to the south of here is the team that really is in the outskirts of Harrisburg, was it on the West Shore? I think it is. Anyway, that team got to be the United States champion, which is a pretty big honor, I think. And Carl passed on. They finally have recognized him properly. Took him a long time because the people that ran the place, in a way, didn't like him for one reason or another. I don't know why. But they finally have recognized him. There was a Carl Stutz Field in Williamsport. I hope I didn't say Williamsburg. Williamsport. And so he does have the recognition, I hope, that he and his family deserve. Here's a real easy one. Why was the Pennsylvania Turnpike built? And anybody who traveled the way from here to Pittsburgh in the 1930s knew exactly what the problem was because of the hills and the curves and here and there and everywhere. You could almost get a little case of dizziness going on Route 30 from here to Pittsburgh? Well, first of all, it was to avoid the curves and hills on Route 30, obviously. It was a safer and easier access to Philadelphia, New York, and other points east for the steel that they produced, and we needed that steel in World War II. It also put a lot of people to work. So all three answers are proper. At time, when they built this, the deal was, do you remember when it was? October 1st, 1940. And do you know what the speed limit was? When they first opened it, they didn't have one. And a lot of hot rods, they had them back then too. A lot of hot rods would go out there for Sunday recreation, and they'd get up to 110, 20 miles an hour. So finally, a year later, they did start a speed limit of 55 or so. And the issue was that it was supposed to pay for itself from tolls, and then they would have, then you could ride it without having to pay a toll. Remember that adage that people say, well, we'll charge you for a while, but then when it's paid for, you won't have to pay tolls anymore. Good thing that wasn't etched in stone, because that hasn't happened since. And of course, they did extend it farther to the west, farther to the east, and then to the north as well, up to Scranton. So they're still building, and it was supposed to become part of the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. That didn't happen. Yes, sir?
The eastern terminus used to be right out here at K Street.
Exactly right. But there were two terminals. Did you know that?
No.
There were two terminals. If anybody traveled that area, there were actually two terminals, maybe a half a mile apart. I never could understand that. Maybe somebody could enlighten me later on. There were actually two exits and entrances a half a mile apart. All right, number 15. Oliver Perry is known as the historical hero for his actions year and year ago. Yes?
You missed number 14.
I missed number 14? All right, let's not do that. What do those people have in common? The answer is sticky. Who are those people? Fields, Barrymore, Marshall, and Louisa May Alcott. I'm not sure where she came from. I knew where Marshall was from the southwest, low. The Barrymores and Fields were from Philadelphia.
Alvin's from Massachusetts.
Yeah, well, they were all on U.S. postage stamp, along with many, many others. All right, now we can go to Oliver Perry. What did he do? When did he utter the famous words, "We have met the enemy and they are ours"? Was it the years 1778, 1883, 1912, 1912, or 1813? And that's the odd part. Battle of 1812, he defeated the British on Lake Erie. And why the Brits had ships on Lake Erie to begin with has always been a mystery to me. There was a fort in Ontario, in that part of Canada, and Perry was sent there as a very young man, and he was told to build a bunch of ships, and he built a bunch of them, and he turned out to be the better navigator. It was very windy when he fought those people, so I think it was the Battle of the Wind, and he won it. And there's been dispute ever since in terms of the person that he bounced from one ship because he left his own ship and went to another ship. That ship, what's the name of that ship? Niagara. That ship has been rebuilt, supposedly with this much wood from the original. This much. If you look with a magnifying glass, you can see it. And it's on the lake. In fact, that ship did traverse the entire St. Lawrence Seaway, and there was a convention of ships. That's not the right term. About 5 or 6 years ago, and our Niagara was there. You can go see it, and maybe even get a chance to go on it. The odd thing about him is that he died just a few years later because he went down south where they got problems today, and he got a disease when he was in South America, and he died at the age of 34. Great loss. All right, now, here are some ideas to consider to raise funds, because one of the governors we have wants to have more and more and more funds, and rather than just do it through income tax or sales tax, here are some alternatives. Now you can pick your favorite. Lease Presque Isle to build Disneyland North. I think that's a wonderful idea. The trouble is we have several months called winter. Sell the state stores. Somebody else had that idea. Make I-81, there's a typo here, make I-81 a toll road. Rent rooms in the state capitol to tourists and even locals when the General Assembly is not in session. That's a marvelous idea. Lease the lottery to a private fundraiser. Somebody else had that idea. Make 81 a toll road. Now here's one that I had. I came up with this brainstorm. Put a casino at every rest stop on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Don't you think that's a wonderful idea? Well, somebody would like some answers about who is going to raise what kinds of things are needed for our budget. And we may have a budget in about 5 or 6 years from now. We'll have the only 5-year budget in the United States of America in 3 more years, because we got last year, this year, and then 3 more before it's finally settled. You know, the problem is, if you are a politician, you can't really deal in politics, if you know what I mean. And if you're a politician at this position and you make people over there on the other side very, very angry with you, then you're not going to get what you really had in mind, because you insult people enough, they respond in kind. And I think, I'm not going to advocate one position or another, you know that. But I think there's been a lack of proper compromise. Every politician needs to understand what that word means and when to use it, because we have not had the kind of compromise we should have. All right, how many state parks do we have? And the person given credit for establishing many of them in the late 1900s was Maurice Goddard. We now have the first notification of this. We now have 121. There was one Washington Crossing State Park. Well, it was really under the aegis of the Historical and Museum Commission. They gave that to the state park system. Nothing else has changed, but now officially we have 121. Maurice Goddard lived until 1995. He was a neighbor a block away from me. People seem to gravitate around our house because Mr. Drawbaugh lived 3 blocks away from us in his final days. So people just knew I was there and they just wanted to move around. What do you know about that? The first one is Valley Forge, which is also a national historical park. All right, what do we have next here? What names do not belong on this list? Well, you can see the names. I think you know 2 of them right away. These, first of all, are all names of our counties. And you know that Reagan, even though a lot of people want to really make one of our counties named after Reagan, they want to name everything. The Empire State Building, they want to make that one named after Mr. Reagan as well. I don't know why. Anyway, those 2 you can reject. Clinton doesn't belong on that list because the Clinton involved here was not named for President Clinton, but this guy was from New York State. And, well, he may have been then, but why they named it, why they named it after him is beyond me.
Well, there's a Fort Clinton up at West Point.
Well, I made a note of that in my preparation here, and I'll come back to that in a little bit, maybe if need be. Anyway, it was named after a person from New York State. How many covered bridges do we have? And where can you find the most of them? Well, I spoke at the Covered Bridge Society in the fall. They had a state convention, and I didn't get a straight answer from those people either. And the reason is, what do you call a a covered bridge? How do you define it? Is it one open to the public to drive across, or to look at, or to memorialize? Because there's one at, what's the name of there's a university,
Messiah College.
Messiah, they have one that they built there. I don't know if you can travel on that one or not.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much.
But there's a lot of, there's some where the road, you're driving along and then you go like this around a covered bridge because they don't want cars to be on it anymore. Technically, you can say this with great authority that we have in Pennsylvania between 213 and 197. You can say that with authority. It's in that number there someplace. And that's the story on covered bridges. Lancaster has 25 of them, and I've been on a few of them, but not all of them. All right. Number 21, the author of the song, Take Me Out to the Ball Game. I think you know what that is. It's sung at most ballparks now in the 7th inning stretch. The odd thing was that Jack Norworth of Philadelphia was on a tram or a subway car, and he saw something, an advertisement for a game coming up, and he said, hey, there ought to be a song about that particular area. So he came up with the words to take me out to the ball game, and he had never been to a ball game. He wrote this in 1908. He didn't go to a ball game for 30 more years. And then he said, oh, now I know why it's so much fun. But there's a case where if you've got an inspiration, even though it doesn't seem logical, go ahead and do it, because he got international fame for writing Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Number 22. This is a very important question. The Three Stooges, and actually there were about 6 of them, all told, were part of a vaudeville act in about 1928, 1929, Jack Haley and the Three Stooges. And they broke off and they started to make movies. And there were a whole bunch of people from New York City, and one, for some strange reason, it floated into New York from Philadelphia. His name is Larry Fine, F-I-N-E. And all the others, Moe and Shemp and Curly, made up the other ones, and until gradually some people died off. And so they made movies forever, it seems like. And the pity of it is, from their income level, the person in charge of Columbia Pictures had them in a box, because these were shorts, they were not major pictures. And they were used by many, many places, and they were very, 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 very popular. But he would call them in every year and say, boys, we're not doing so hot with these. So I'm not going to raise your income. I'm not going to raise your pay. And he cheated them out of a lot of money, several $1 million. That was really unfortunate. And that was Harry Cohn who did that. Not a very nice, not a very nice person. All right. What is musician Fred Waring's lasting contribution to a sport? Fred Waring, I met, his passion was golf. He bought Shawnee on the Delaware golf course, 27 holes. There was a U.S. Open in 1939, and Sam Snead won that tournament. And also, at the same place, Arnold Palmer was invited to play in a tournament there, and the daughter of a wealthy businessman went to that to play in it and brought his daughter along with him, and that's where Arnie met Winnie, his first wife. She died about 10 years ago, and he since has remarried, but that's where they met, at the Shawnee. And then Fred Waring bought it to use for his Pennsylvania musical group. Now, I've played the course many times. Fred Waring played as often as he could, and he never had a hole in one. And of course, that's the grand fortune of a golfer to have one or two or three holes in one. He never had one. He could not hit a low-numbered iron. So he developed, and this is the lasting contribution, he developed the high wood, 13, 14, 15. That man back there plays golf. He knows what I'm talking about because those were easy to hit. And he invented that, and every time he'd go someplace, he would ask the local pros to come in and he'd demonstrate these high-numbered golf clubs to them. So that's he's the one that got us started. The most important achievement of Governor William Milton Shack. Well, the 4-lane highway into the airport, that's true. 23 women, state agencies headed, that's true. And then the last one, I'll tell you what happened there. And this is true, according to Pete Wambach, who heard it from Muriel, his wife. Muriel and Milton still lived in Philadelphia area. They hadn't moved in any place yet. They did move into the new governor's quarters, but then they got flooded out. You remember that. But before that happened, they were driving into Harrisburg, and she said, Milton, we're going to stop at the next rest area. Give me a dime. And he said, what? A dime? Yeah, I got to have a dime to use the women's restroom. He said, why? Because the stalls had a lock on them, and you had to put a dime in to be able to use them. And Milton says, men don't have to do that. So the next day he called, I guess, a personal friend who was head of the Turnpike Commission. He said, Charlie, I want you to tear those things out tomorrow. That's an insult to women for having to do that. So that's been one of his most important achievements. All right, now, number 25, I'm going to refer you now to a situation in Mapleton, Pennsylvania. There's a cemetery there. I know where it is, and I can even tell you where it is. And in the cemetery, there's a grave site with a 4 by 6 or 7 foot slab on a grave, and it has the words to a nationally famous song on that grave site. They've been incised by the person who now occupied the place below. It turns out that Marion Samuel Cree, C-R-E-E, his first name was Marion, and he was in World War I and came out. He was a musician. He wrote a lot of songs, and people heard the songs that he wrote during the 1920s and early 1930s. And he saw an ad in the paper that Irving Berlin Inc. wanted a patriotic song, partly to allow Kay Smith to sing it for the first time on her radio program. She was very, very popular. Your great-grandparents know who Kay Smith was. And he entered a song that he had written. He saw an ad sponsored by Irving Berlin Inc. Now, there's another mysterious thing. Nobody can find a copy of that ad anywhere. In any case, he did enter the contest, he says. And a short time later, he came back from work one day, and somebody says, hey, Marion. They called him, I don't know if they called him Marion or Sam. I heard your song on the Kay Smith show last night. God Bless America by Irving Berlin. And he gets credit for that song. I prefer it to our national song, the Star Spangled Banner. I prefer God Bless America to that, no question about it. What he said didn't make any sense to me about how he happened to write it back in 1918. Anyway, I think something happened. No, I don't have any knowledge about this at all. I think the entries came in, and there may have been a whole bunch of them, and somebody on the staff took these all up, rejected a few, kept the others. Marion went to court, and in the process of going to court, a lawyer contacted him on behalf of Irving Berlin, Inc. and said, don't worry about this, because it's a moot point. That's a lawyer term, you know what I mean. That's a moot point because the rules said all songs become the property of Irving Berlin, Inc. And I think that's where the problem developed. The writer that I first heard about this from says that he talked to Marion's widow and children, and they said the man was the same as you or me. He really believed it. He argued, and he made it a lifelong struggle. Unfortunately, he let himself be consumed by it, and when he died, he made arrangements for the verse, and I guess all the verses, and to be put on his gravesite. Was the man crazy? He'd have to be to go to this length. And this is the most perplexing situation we've come across since we started Pennsylvania Magazine 30-some years ago. And I don't have the answer, and I never will. So you make up your own mind about who wrote God Bless America, because I don't know who. Okay, that, by the way, there was a Pennsylvania Magazine published. It was really a broadside of maybe 2 pages in 1776 by Thomas Paine. He was a friend of Benjamin. He also wrote something called Common Sense, which was an overview of the reasons why people should support going against Great Britain. I can have some help now because that's the end of the 25-point presentation. But now I want to pass out Pennsylvania Magazine and another sheet of paper to everybody here. I could use a little help passing these out.
Was it?
And pass those out to people. And I've got pictures here, if you don't have pictures in the audience, I believe. And pass these out, everybody should get one of these. This is our current edition of the magazine. It's published every other month. And of course, the inside back cover is the most important section of the magazine, because that's my column. In fact, this one's rather interesting because, as you see, there were certain people who signed the Declaration of Independence. Let me have on the magazine. There were 54, I think, who signed the Declaration of Independence, and 9 of them came from Pennsylvania. 9 of them. Really, I don't know why so many. One person wasn't there to sign the Declaration of Independence. Can you guess who that was? Benjamin Franklin. He had been sent by his compatriots to France to raise money and soldiers because they knew the fight was going to be going on soon. There were 9 signers. This is a very, very difficult little quiz that I made because the main reason was I wanted you to have a feeling about these 9 people. You know, these people risked their lives and their fortunes. Had they failed, they wouldn't have gotten to the year 1780 because they would have been eliminated by the folks over there. The odd thing about the Ben sign, no, Ben Franklin is shown there. Well, I think that he wasn't, but anyway, I'll have to double check that myself. I didn't think he signed it. Anyway, there were a bunch of people who were really not very nice people. 2 of them bought a lot of land on speculation. They borrowed money and they bought land and then they defaulted. And these were signers of the Declaration of Independence. One guy of the signer, he bought up an awful lot of perishable goods and he waited till there was a shortage and then he put them on sale at very, very inflated prices. And they almost killed him when they found out about it. Anyway, the magazine comes out for a while, every other issue, and my son, Matt, our son, Matt, is the editor right now, and he does a beautiful job with it. So I give him most of the credit. Of course, you know who trained him. My wife and I trained him so well. Now we have a magazine we can be proud of across the USA. Now, if you'd like to receive 2 more issues free of the magazine, put your name and address on the card that I passed out. If you don't want to receive 2 more issues, don't fill it out. Plain and simple. Because we want to make sure, because we are not supported by advertising, I think as you'll see, we depend everything on subscriber support for the publication. So we want you to make sure you'll love the magazine. And some people like magazines, and some people don't. And I know that right now. If I pass out on my whole block a copy to everybody there, half of them would say, "What's this?" "No, we don't want it." But that's how people are. Some people don't like to read this sort of thing. They read other things, perhaps. Finally, I wanted to make one point, and then I'll let you go or ask questions or whatever you want to do. One of our problems in this state is that we have, and we've had it for a long time, but it's even more acute now, in our public school or private school system, as far as that goes. We have a numbers race. We want kids to be taught to the test. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And parents are very upset about this. The state makes demands, the nationals make demands on our schools, and as a result, programs dealing with the arts, music, and history have been downgraded a great, great deal. And my point is, in talking about these things, the reason I like to talk about them is that almost every person that we mentioned in our presentation today was really a role model for our young people. But if you ask the average student in Pennsylvania, you pick the school, and you say, "Who is Daniel Drawbaugh?" They wouldn't even know how to spell it, much less know who he was. And who was Oliver Perry? Who was he? Etc. down the list. We aren't teaching young people today. They're supposed to be taught in the 4th grade and the 10th grade. That's what the State Department of Education requires, that some teaching be given. Now, you heard the word "some." If you were to call on the phone today and say, "Where's I called what we dealt with here. This is my curriculum for the presentation today. Can you send me the curriculum that you want to have taught in schools in the 4th grade and the 10th grade?" The answer is, we'll get back to you on that, because the State Department has not specified exactly what should be taught and how. And of course, I say that there should be a very definite unit of study at those two grades. And I'm going to keep pushing for this as long as I can. That's the end of my presentation for me. And now you are excused.